Hey guys, what's up? Okay, so I'm going to try and get through as much of the tank rig as I can while trying to show you some really cool stuff that I've developed for it, the automation, the dynamic looking stuff. I'm going to try it quickly. So to start, what I want to do is just show you the static rig. There is a ground plane, it comes into play later. Don't ask questions. The first control we're going to take a look at is this orientation control. Using the orientation control, we could choose to rock the tank back and forward and backward, sorry, side to side and forward and backward. When we're doing that sort of thing, what we are actually doing is we are rocking it from a central position. So you'll notice that both the left-hand side are being interacted at the same time, or affected rather. As the left goes up, the right goes down, and vice versa. If we didn't want that kind of behavior to take place, though, I've developed another set of controls over here called suspension weight, and we have it for the front, the back, and the left and the right. Basically, one control per corner of the tank. What's happening here, if I grab the left side as an example, is I can choose to raise and lower the left side, but it's maintaining the position of the right side. So the right side of the tank is constantly in contact with the ground, despite us raising and lowering. And you can actually see that if we take a look at like front and back as an example as well. I can choose to raise and lower the front or the back of the tank, and whichever side we are choosing to raise and lower, the opposite side is unaffected. You can also choose to utilize these in weird and wacky ways, do them independently. We're going to have an example where this comes into play a little bit later. The final control that I want to show you here, which is currently all the way on, is suspension offset. So if I turn this off, you'll see what it's doing is it's returning our suspension to like a rest state, if you will. At this default position, I have the control to raise and to lower my casters and the suspension independently. If I were to turn this all the way on and put us at max extension, let me just get all the way over there. At max extension, what you're going to notice is I am now no longer able to extend my suspension any further. Now, there's a good reason for why we want this to be something that we can control. And again, I'm going to touch on that later. But to start, I just want you to be aware of what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select that there. I'm going to go into camera perspective and we're going to hit play. Um, I haven't done any complex animation in my scene file today. What we are taking a look at right now is a tank traveling straight along the x-axis, just utilizing this one circular controller here. It's going to do a 180-degree rotation and do that for about 2,400 frames. And one thing I'd like you to notice is we're doing a 180-degree turn, and the tank treads are going to continue to work as expected. There's no stuttering, nothing breaking. The treads, there's no sliding with them. It's actually not as complicated as you would think it is when it comes to doing it for a tank. Inside of Blender, we do have limitations and dependencies that can cause quite a bit of problems, but I can tell you with certainty that for tanks, we can override that, and that's what I've done here. If you have questions about that, we can touch on it in another video. I just want to focus on kind of playing with the tank today. So again, okay, boring animation, just going in a straight line, nothing exciting is happening. Look, if you want more out of it, I get you. Let's introduce the ground plane because this is where it gets interesting. If I bring my ground plane into the picture, I am now going to have a vastly different animation and it's doing everything I have programmed it to do. Keep in mind, I've only used Blender's default tools and I have also not used any scripts, plugins, anything like that for this. What you see here is 100% automated. So my tank is now adhering to the surface of the ground plane. It's kind of following it, if you will, as best as it can, orienting itself along the way. The suspension is now also interacting with that. So the treads and the casters and the suspension, they're all working to collide with the ground. And you can see here that it looks quite nice. Like if we zoom out and kind of watch it along, you can see the casters doing different things and kind of moving up and down. It's a very natural feeling, organic feeling animation. And I mean, this is all intended. I've done this because I want to be able to create complex looking animation without having to put a lot of effort into it. Um, but there's some other really cool features that I want to showcase that go outside of this. First off, the controls that we were taking a look at earlier, you can actually use these controls to override your automation. The reason you're seeing the suspension and wheels, sorry, the treads and the wheels go through the ground here is because it's respecting the realistic limitations that we've put in. Once again, I can choose to raise and lower things, but they can only go so far. So when we put too much weight on one side, when it can no longer go any further, it's going to push through the ground. But these are all just different means of kind of achieving one really, really, really kick-ass look. Um, the last thing that I want you to notice, I apologize, but I can't remember if I mentioned it, playing back in real time. Even when we're kind of screwing around with the rocking of the tank here, it's doing its best to stay in real time. And that's a really big deal considering everything that's going on and how detailed the model is. What we're going to do though now is we're actually going to jump over to a different part of the animation here. We're going to go to frame 970. This is my favorite frame. And I want you to take a look at this right here. My tank treads aren't all touching the ground. Some begin to lift off, and you would expect that towards the rear of the tank. But if I were to actually come over here to my suspension offset and return it to its neutral state, you'll actually notice that there's quite a gap going between. Now, there is play available in the suspension, and it is semi-realistic in some instances from photos that I've seen for treads to lift in that way. If there's not enough weight on the backside of the tank, it's just going to lift off the ground. It's the way it works. But if artistically you're unhappy with that, that's why we have our suspension offset here. It allows us to use that to reach down a little bit further. So I can kind of have it really hug that hill as it's coming across. And I think that's the final thing that I want to show you in this scene file. Let's now bounce over to another scene file. Now, there's a couple things that are going on here, and it's kind of really exciting. This is the most exciting for me. In this scene file, allow me to turn the shadow off, sorry. I don't have any animation happening, but I do have the generic rig doing its usual thing. So if we were to translate Y as an example, you can see that it's caressing the hill here and the suspension is bouncing along as we expect it to. Some of the other stuff that's going to happen though is we've got this extra object here, and this is where stuff gets like actually really cool. So I can actually drag my tank and have it adhere to the ramp as well as the ground geometry, which is absolutely fantastic. And these are two separate objects. I can show you that by positioning the tank on the ramp here. And if we raise the ground, it's now on the ground. If we lower the ground, back on the ramp. Um, and this, you know what? Let's move our tank obstacle out of the way. We can actually see this better if we were to move our tank over, I think, and let's drag it here. So check this out. Not only is it on the ramp, it's actually in the ground, or on the ground rather. Um, it's colliding with both objects. The automation is allowing you to interact with multiple things at once. So we come along here, we interact with the ground, and suddenly one side of the tank gets picked up by the ramp, but the other side continues to adhere to that ground plane. Now there is a thing that's happening here where we're pushing an awful lot of weight down on one side, and I'm going to show you some of the um, standard controls here. If we were to maybe change the weight and lift that weight off that corner, using the orientation control, we've now broke the other side. I could probably get a better result actually rocking it back and forth. That kind of looks a little bit more fun, but I think we're still having a similar problem up here. And of course, again, the reason why the tank tread's going through the ground is because I cannot physically condense my suspension anymore. Compress, actually, is a much better word. I cannot compress that suspension anymore, therefore it's going through the ground. But in order to resolve that issue, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at our front and back weight here. So it actually appears that I have accidentally left them in a adjusted state. So here's what it actually looks like normally. To resolve that issue, I'm going to go to back left and I'm going to lift the back left up. Now I'm satisfied with that. That looks much better. But I'm going to double check the front here and I can kind of see it doing a bit of a wonky thing. So on the front right, I'm also going to lift the front right. And that's kind of why we have these various weight controls. And then I can throw it back in objects mode and I can watch it continue to do everything I expect it to do. So there's a lot of really cool things that are happening here, especially the fact that we can collide with multiple objects at a time. I can raise and lower my ramp, and the tank is impacted by that. And they're two separate objects, which is absolutely fascinating. So I love this. I love everything about this. The final thing that I want to tell you though, real quick, is you can take this sort of rig out of context of a vehicle and you can apply it to an object. So let's say you have an object that you need to place on the ground. I want to make sure that it's got 3 points of contact. It does, barely, but 3 points of contact. I can position this anywhere I want and it's going to maintain those 3 points of contact. And it's because it's doing the exact same thing the tank is doing. It's going to respect the rules that we have created that allow it to stick to the ground here. And if you're not satisfied with the orientation of it and you want it to look a little differently, you can. We have an override that allows you to reorient it, do whatever you want with this. We could raise it up, we could scale it up, we could do absolutely anything to this. And no matter what, I'm just going to reset it all. It's always going to adhere to the ground with those initial points of contact. So yeah, that's kind of everything that I've been working on. I hope you guys find this to be as fascinating as I do because I absolutely love what we've created here.